Most people don't know this. Some of the best writers come from the most traumatic situations. And so for me, that's very true.
Cindy Mich has spent 25 years as an award-winning journalist.
A mother, a published author, creative writer, and a publicist.
I have a very, very large love affair with the written word. I truly believe that the written word is like magic. You can make incredible things happen.
What's the greatest story you've ever told?
Oh, gosh. That's not fair. As a writer, I think we always feel like, okay, the next one's coming, the big one is coming. I think I'll know, like when I'm like, okay, this is it.
I'm curious how you manage to go through grief and also manage to be a high-functioning adult.
I suck at grief. I'm not good at it. I don't think anyone is. I've thrown pencils across the room. I've thrown my phone across the room. I think in society, we don't talk enough about loss, and we don't talk about how much it sucks a lot or how much it hurts.
In the moments where you've been happy in the last 3 years, does that come with guilt?
For the last 2.5 years, I've had to look at that guilt. I've had to look at figuring out what life is going to look like. It's an ebb and flow. If anybody is listening and you want to help grievers, I always say
Cindy, welcome to the Ginni Show. I'm so excited to have you because very rarely do I have a guest who's a mother, a published author, creative writer, and a publicist, a broadcast and film marketing and distribution pro, also a journalist and radio host. So I guess my question is, are you three people?
Well, some might say that. Most of us creatives have like three personalities. I'm not going to lie. You've got the very public persona, then you have the very private persona, and then you have the one that kind of walks between both of them. I think most of us start at one thing, like I'm a writer by trade, and then that spirals off into everything else. So I think that's really what it comes down to. And I'm very highly ADHD, so I get bored a lot. So if I get bored doing one thing, I just create something else, then I'm doing something else.
And you accomplish a lot, because a lot of creatives, especially those with ADHD, they'll create something, move on to the next, but they don't see it through to completion. So there's discipline that goes with the method to your madness. How do you manage to achieve that?
Well, first of all, you have to learn discipline, and not everyone does. It's very easy to get distracted when you're self-employed because you can be at home watching movies. You could be taking the day off. You could be doing whatever. So first of all, it's figuring out specifically what drives you, what's your passion. So if my tickle in my tummy happens every day, I've satisfied something. So you have to learn how to ignore outside things and make your big passion your priority. Number two, you have to have downtime. I've learned this the hard way because I do so much that now I'm learning, now we need to slow down. Now we need to be quiet for a little while. So you need to know your limits when it comes down to how much becomes too much. But most importantly, I think it really comes down to the fact that encouragement. I am so blessed to have tons of people I know all over the place, and some I've never even met, who are constantly telling me not to quit. Keep pushing, accelerating. And that's a lot of it right there. So I think if I stick to those three models every day and get a little time off in the near future, I'll be doing good.
See, what I love about what you just shared is you have very clear, definitive kind of building blocks and boundaries in place, right?
Yes.
When you're saying it, it sounds so easy, but I think what people don't realize is the habits, the times, the resources, the trials and tribulations you've probably gone through to make that be so seamless.
Yeah.
It took a while, but you found your sweet spot and like, I can accomplish this much with all these boundary time and circle of people to support you, really.
Yeah, and it only took, almost 55 years. I think that's a lot of it too, is most of us artists or anyone that I have found that works in the creative field is either lived through some kind of trauma or significant trauma over a long period of time, has had a tragedy, has had an epiphany later in life, like they turn 45, they're like, what am I going to do when I grow up? And then all of a sudden they realize this is what I want to do. So yeah, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of, in fact, some of my closest friends said to me recently, I didn't think you were going to make it. That's a little ouch, but I'm like, that just kind of drives you a little bit more as far as that goes. So I do think there's some mentality of, there's a mitigating factor why all of us start and then why we keep going. And then we have to keep remembering that as we go on.
One thing that we talked about a little bit off air was the fact that typically you're a behind the scenes person. You're kind of in my role where you're the journalist asking the guest the questions. Yes. And I really relate to you on that part because I'm the same. I like being behind the scenes. I like producing. I like, asking questions. I'm curious in general and I love learning about other people. But when I'm in front of the camera, I'm like, oh, this is weird, but I have to do it anyway.
Yep.
How do you play both roles? Because it's actually a hard skill set to be one, the curious person, and one to say things to make other people curious about you.
Absolutely. And it's not something that happened overnight. My background is in writing. So to learn how to be comfortable on the camera takes some time. In order to learn how to properly research someone and ask the right questions takes some experience and time. Also, you have to be willing to work with all types of personalities. I've come to learn in all these years, you're going to meet people who you may not mesh with very well, or you might meet people that have very limited experience and not much out there to research. So you have to learn how to ad lib. You have to learn how to fill in. And more importantly, you have to have a process. So my process is a little bit different. Most people don't know this, and I've only shared this on social media. So if Cindy has to go on the radio, or if I have to go on camera, especially on camera, I usually will either watch my husband's films, because that makes me very calm. I have a musician here in town that I listen to very much that's independent. This morning I was watching Sons of Anarchy because I was nervous. So I'm like a little Jax Teller, never hurt anybody. So I'm like, oh, calm down. So I have these little methods that kind of get me into the right place as far as being calm, being relaxed, being able to put full focus on what I'm looking at. And I'm also trying to learn to stop looking at myself so much. I'm very self-conscious about how I look on the camera. Drives me nuts all the time. In fact, even when people say, oh, you look so great, I'm like, no, I don't. So these are all things I think that as you work along in the industry, you just learn what works and what doesn't work. And then whatever works, it becomes a practice every time you do it. Make sense?
100%. And I really hear you on the fact that when I do calls like this too, or Zooms, just, meetings or whatnot, it's very hard not to look at yourself and then be critical of it rather than looking at the person and being present with the person. That is something that I also catch myself doing. I'm like, oh, what am I actually doing here?
Right. There you go.
Cindy, one thing I learned about you recently, which piqued my curiosity. You are a Milwaukee Bucks fan. Now, everybody knows I am a diehard New York Knicks fan. And I imagine, even though we go for different teams,
yes,
you and I can probably share a mutual disdain for the Indiana Pacers. So I'm going to lead into that a little bit. Do you share my disdain for the Indiana Pacers?
Oh my gosh. So, you know how it is when you work in a professional realm. So everybody, like when you get a following, everybody watches what you say, right? So I'm just like, all bets were off. Like when the Bucks came on, I'm like, Indiana people, I was not nice. I was so embarrassed by my behavior. I'd be going online. I'd be posting like, you Indiana fools. I hope you're happy that you won one little game because let's face it, we only had injured players and that's the reason why. So I purposely goat them. And I won't lie. I might have gone on the Pacers page like once and posted something about like your team sucks and ours doesn't. Okay, I'll admit, like I don't get like, I'm also a Brewers fan, but I don't get crazy like that. Like, you see what I mean? Like I'm also, all my other teams I'm a fan of, as far as that goes, but there's just something about the Bucks and the NBA playoffs where I just got like crazy. I bought playoff tickets. It's so jazzed. We went to the playoff game. They won. I'm like, this is awesome. But just like with anything, you have to look at the reality of it. We had a bunch of injured players. That doesn't really help. Our star player was out. A couple of the top ones were out too. So it gets frustrating, What I don't like is like so I'm in Wisconsin. We have the Packers. I'm not a Packer fan, okay? But what I notice is that people get nasty, like to each other, like Chicago, Minnesota, and us. It's like people are like this. I'm like, dude, okay, at the end of the day, even though I was sassy, they're just people. It's just a game. Okay, exactly. The Bucks are going to go back or whatever. And just for the record, I go to New York every month, so I don't hate on New York either. I actually don't mind some of your teams. Just saying.
I appreciate the mutual love there for the Knicks. And back to your point, like, Pacers, you beat two injured teams.
Right?
Like, let's just start there. Like, you're carrying on like you won a championship, but we had half a team. The Knicks literally had a team. You guys had half a team. Giannis was out.
Right.
Lillard was injured.
Yep.
Like, your engine room is down. Like, how could you not win Pacers? Like,
Right.
Anyway.
And then they're walking around.
How do you feel about Tyrese Halliburton, or Halliburton, I like to call him?
What I don't like is also the arrogance, like they walk around and they're fans in them and they're all talking like they're the best team in the world and they worked for it so hard and they deserve this. And I'm just like, come on, man, call a spade a spade. So, for a while, I was even not going to interview anyone from Indiana. But then I got over it. I'm like, come on now. You're taking this a little too far. Like, you got to let it go. So now I can safely say I'm over it.
Well, enough about the trash talk on the Pacers. I want to kind of move on to, something that's pretty...
Got it.
In your expansive wheelhouse of talents, I see a drive for storytelling.
Yeah.
So I want to know, what's the common creative thread that ties your work and hobbies together?
Well, I think it's honestly, it's very simplistic, and I know it sounds very niche and nostalgic, but it's very true. I have a very, very large love affair with the written word. I truly believe that the written word is like magic. You can make incredible things happen. I think the very first time someone wrote to me, who is a friend I've never met, and she said, I need you to understand this clearly. I was going through a hard time, bad writer's block, and this happens a lot with Cindy, believe it or not. And she wrote me and she said, I need you to know that the things that you said literally saved my life. And I think that became kind of the common thread for me, which means everything that I write is usually meant to either entertain or engage you or educate you in some way, but most of all, usually to inspire or motivate someone. I think that anything I do creatively has to have that theme to it. Otherwise, I'm less than pleased, or I won't publish it, or I won't put it out there. I think there's a reason why those of us with a gift were given that. And so I think I have a responsibility to follow that commonality and common theme all the time.
I recall when I first listened to one of your podcasts, you were on the Entreprenista podcast back in 2021. And one thing that you said really stayed with me too. It was like, make it a priority that you have personal time for yourself during the workday. Like, walk away from everything for a while. And as an entrepreneur, it can be hard to just be like, yeah, I'm walking away from this, because we're not programmed to do that. We're programmed to do, not, be away. Tell me how you came to that piece of advice.
Well, it's a threefold. First of all, when you have children, you can't be married to your computer or anything else. Do you know why? Because it's always, I need a ride, I need this, I need you to do this or that. So number one, your children keep you very balanced when it comes to, there's only so much time for work, and primarily they're the number one all of the time. And even if that means you're having to postpone certain things for work. So that's number one. Number two, my Michael. So when you fall in love, you're always wanting to play hooky. It's just that simple. So there's always that enticement of, oh my God, he's right there and I want to spend time with him. So he was very good at dragging me away purposely. Like when I'd wake up, he wouldn't let me go on the phone right away. He took it away from me, or he made me leave or go someplace or take a walk or whatever. So he kept me very balanced. And number three, most importantly, I'm almost 55. What does that mean? My neck hurts. My back hurts. The chiropractor is my best friend. I don't want a chiropractor forever. You know what that means? I got to get up and walk or do things. Having all of those things in mind, just being able to realize, okay, you know what? I've been here 2 hours. And it is, again, discipline. You have to consciously look at the time and say, I'm not doing it more than this, or I'm going to learn to say no. And that's really hard for me. I say yes to everyone a lot. Got to stop doing it, because I end up having like no time to breathe. Like right now, I have no time to breathe with work. But I think doing and implementing all of those things, that's kind of how I figured out, yeah, you know what? I have to be available for myself.
I love that you said that you have to be available for yourself, because clearly you pay attention to the cues of your body. One thing I really appreciate about you, Cindy, is just how open you've been about your grief process. On Instagram, you really demonstrate the reality of loss. I lost my mother in 2021. It was a shock because, I was here, she was in Australia, and I got the call saying that, oh, she's at end of life, which was a lot. It meant that I had to go to Australia, endure a 14-day hotel quarantine, and think, oh gosh, is she going to die today? Like you wake up and you kind of experience life and death every day in those 14 days, which is really weird. So I'm curious how you manage to go through grief, ride its waves, because it comes in waves, it's never linear, and also manage to be a high-functioning adult is my question there.
Well, if you watch this today and you happen to go back and look at 2020, 2021, you would see a very different look of Cindy, of course, because when my Michael got sick, everything stopped. I stopped working, I stopped doing almost everything, and I was the main caretaker for everyone here. When he passed in 2021, then I wanted to do nothing, because nothing seemed to make sense anymore, because he wasn't watching or he wasn't looking, or I felt very responsible for his passing. And that's something I take very seriously. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've had to look at that guilt. I've had to look at figuring out what life is going to look like without him. Just today, in fact, it's an ebb and flow. So today I was crying an hour ago. And then for 2 days, you don't cry. I mean, I think you learn to stay away from things that you know. I know now what's going to trigger me. I know there are certain things that I have a hard time with. Like Michael was an actor, so I used to be able to watch his films. Now I'm selective about when I do that, because in some ways people don't realize it's almost cruel to see the one person that you love right in front of you, but know that they're not really right in front of you. They're not attainable to you. So for me, I find that hard. So I think it was coming to a point where after about a year and a half, I said, okay, I have to look at this realistically. I have a film festival. And I said, after filmmakers kept asking, we need you to come back. And I thought about that. But I met Michael through my festival. So there's very big significance to holding on to that. My radio show, Michael used to listen to that. He loved that show very much. And so that mattered to him. So I stayed connected to the film community because I think he sees me, because I think it's the only way I can get him to be proud of me. I know that sounds silly, but to me, that's very important. His approval is very important even now. I also think that there's coming a point where you have to learn your limits. And I know I'm at the point where I haven't had any time to get very angry about what's happened. So I suspect there's a junkyard out there or a rage room somewhere that's going to have a very large visit from this girl, because I'm incredibly angry and haven't had time to process that. But I mean, I guess overall, you kind of use your work as a means to deal with your grief. I don't think it ever goes away. I don't think, unlike most people, I don't think there is a positive spin to this. I know he's in a better place. I know he's not hurting, but I'm not happy that he had to go to that place. And, I wake up and half of me is gone. I mean, there's nothing I can write that will ever make that better. And I unfortunately haven't been able to write to him yet. That's one of the goals this year, is to write directly to him. And I think staying busy is a lot of it. I think laughing as much as humanly possible is important. I keep thinking if I make him mad enough, he'll visit me. So that's the other thing, is I've been trying lately to just do stuff to annoy him so that he'll actually show up, or rattle the house or do something. But there are signs. I just took a trip to Vegas, and there were 3 or 4 definitive signs. In fact, I almost walked into a man who would have been an older looking Michael. And so I was like, is this supposed to mean something? So I suck at grief. I'm not good at it. I don't think anyone is. And I'm very candid about it because I have a large following and I sometimes fall down and I need them to help me. So like if you go to my Instagram, you'll see where I'll say, okay, I need my best friend. I miss him. I love him. I think it's healthy. I think in society, we don't talk enough about loss, and we don't talk about how much it sucks a lot or how much it hurts.
Sometimes for me, it feels like too that grief, there's never really a good time to go back into it. Like you've got to learn to be with it while you be your other things as well. And that in itself is a lot to carry.
Yes.
Right? Like,
absolutely.
Oh, I got to be an entrepreneur, a journalist, a radio host, a mother, all the other 3 personalities that you have, Cindy, that the 3 people that you are. And then you got grief just sitting there with you. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And I've come to embrace the fact that it's okay. And I know that for those of you who are going to follow me today, hopefully, I am a big mouth journalist. I'm very real. I'm very open. I'm very raw. So I'm very protective about my grief as well. I've come to learn it's okay to tell people, listen, I need you to stop saying I'm sorry, or I need you to stop telling me that I'm going to get over it, or that I need to move on, or that I need to do this. Everyone has their own way about this, and I think it's okay if you respect that, even if they're sad a lot, even if they cry, even if they're putting up sad pictures. It's what you need to do. So I think it's okay to just put that line up and say, I'm going to do this way. And if you're okay with that, great. And if you're not, I need you just to stand over here until I'm done or till I figure it out. And most people are okay with that, I think.
I'm wondering if you've had experiences where, like you said, most people are okay with it, but do you find it exhausting having to tell people, communicate with people how to be with you?
Oh my gosh. I've thrown pencils across the room. I've thrown my phone across the room. I've screamed in my own house. I've actually defriended some people. I actually cut ties with someone very close to me, and we made up. We were fine. But at the time, he had made a comment to me. He had said the term, you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself. And I thought to myself, look at my career. I'm getting up and I'm breathing and I'm taking care of kids that are almost grown, and I'm going to work and I'm here, okay? I'm maybe not in the way you want me to be, but I'm not dead, and I'm not wanting to die, and I'm not harming myself. I get it. People have a natural tendency to want to take care of you, and they want you to be happy, and they want you to be, yourself. What they don't realize is that version isn't coming back, because that left with him. So whatever this version is a much better version because, well, he helped create a wonderful version. However, I have to figure out now who I look like as me now, today, without him. And I don't know. I don't think I've got that figured out. I'm working on it, and I guess I'm trying to give myself credit that I do all of this, because I could just give up doing everything that I love and just do a very generic job. And I could do that. And it would probably be easier. It's hard to go on camera when you want to cry. And then when people want to talk about stuff you don't want to talk about. But, that is what life is. A lot of times I'm like, just give me some space, let me figure it out. So I just think people, if anybody is listening and you want to help grievers, I always say it's the 3-way. Stop saying you're sorry. Because usually if they had cancer like mine, you didn't kill them. I usually take the rap for that in my own head. Number 2, you need to be cognizant that we need things. I think after funerals, people assume, oh, it's all over with. No, it's not. In fact, year 2 is far worse for me than year 1 in some ways. So remember to be there and be present and to ask us what we need, or just listen. Sometimes just people want to talk about things. And number 3, don't ever forget the person. I've been very, very staunch about making sure no one forgets who Michael is. That's very important.
In the moments where you've been happy in the last 3 years, does that come with guilt?
Oh, amen, all the time. I literally had a conversation with this a while ago with somebody that I know and love very much, and she said that. And I said, well, of course. I've always questioned, why am I here and why isn't he? Why was I spared and why wasn't he? And the best answer that I have is, if you had known Michael, you would know that he had a very difficult life. It was very challenging in many levels. And I think God, because I'm a Catholic, I think that God said, listen, you need a rest. You've done as best as you can do, and this is pretty much it. And you need to go where you need to go. And as for me, I think the reason I'm still here is probably because all these wonderful people keep saying to me, you know what, you've motivated me to do this. I'm going to start this book because of you, or I'm going to do this because of you. And I'm so grateful that people say that. But that leads me to believe maybe that's why I'm here, because people need help. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. I wish I had the answer for it. I just wish. That's the best way to put it. I wish.
I think that's a very apt and appropriate answer. You clearly inspire so many people. I'm wondering if and what has inspired you recently.
Well, I tend to say this all the time, and people think I'm kidding, and I'm not. Every time I interview someone, I'm inspired because, first of all, they're so god-awful candid and lovely about their talents, and they're humble most of the time. So I'm very inspired by that. I'm inspired by the fact that my children have done so very much in just a short amount of time. Like my kids who are grown, they did more in like 20, 30 some years of living than I did. When I was in my 20s and 30s, oh no. Not a lot was going on there. In fact, a lot of mistakes was going on there. So I'm very inspired by the fact that they get up and they keep achieving so very much with such good attitudes. I mean, I'm inspired by the fact that some of my closest friends are enduring the same kind of tragedies as myself, or same kinds of losses, or just bad situations, and they're not giving up. For me, that's a very, very big thing, especially when they are broken and they come to me and they offer to help me. That to me is probably the most inspiring thing that can happen, when someone has nothing to offer in their own mind and they give you everything that they have of them. That's a huge inspiration.
I love that. I love that you shared that. I want to ask you a question which may seem loaded, but what's the greatest story you've ever told?
Oh gosh, that's not fair. Because honestly, I'm not sure that the greatest story has been told yet. As a writer, I think we always feel like, okay, the next one's coming, the big one is coming. Some people would tell you that my story should be told and hasn't been yet, and so I'm debating that. I briefly told Michael's story when he was alive, when I first interviewed him. I think that was a really great story. Most recently, I interviewed a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor. I would probably say that's going to end up being one of the top 3 I've ever told, only because it's true testament. And in the Jewish faith, that's, them being able to testify is a huge, huge thing. And the imprint that it's left on me, and the fact that I'm able to now work with this family and befriend them, that's a huge thing for me. That story isn't fiction. That's very sadly real and traumatic, and he's a huge inspiration. Ben Lesser is amazing. I would have to say for now, those are it. I just don't know that I've told it yet. I think I'll know, like when I'm like, okay, this is it. But I think Ben might be pretty darn close there.
What were the trials and tribulations you went through to actually get to the place that you are today when it comes to discipline, creativity, and fitting in everything that you are, that is so important to you?
Well, I think first of all, I had to come across certain people that kind of led me in the way. You know, I have a dear friend, Sherry, who was instrumental in showing me the kind of gypsy side of myself that I wasn't being able to see. I think I've had some boyfriends that have been instrumental in pushing in the right direction. Obviously, Michael. Michael gave me peace. Michael helped me figure out my purpose. He gave me confidence. What I think people don't realize is some of the best writers come from the most traumatic situations. And so for me, that's very true. And I think that it took a very long time for me to want to deal with those things and figure out how to make that work, because writing is a very mental skill. It's incredibly difficult to get clarity. So working on that was optimal. I think the biggest thing was, I think you have to learn early on when you have kids that clearly the children are going to be first priority. So of course I worked regular jobs for a long time while still writing, etc. And I think it was about age 40 where I was finally like, yeah, I'm pretty done with like this traditional regular job sort of thing. I'm just over it, because we all have to have a side shuffle, right? And then at 40, I said, okay, the goal here is to become self-employed. And so I worked on this for 14 years, and now here I am able to do that. And it does take that long, folks, by the way, because it's not simple unless you're Hollywood, which I'm not. So I think I had to get past all of those various things. There were things that eventually I'll talk about that all factor into this as far as my own personal life, which I'm very guarded about because it's hard to talk about a lot of those things. But what I will say is I'm a huge admirer of some of the people that take some traumatic, awful situations in their life and they turn them around into positives. They write books, they make movies, they do things like public speaking. They go into classrooms and they speak and tell people about their trials and such. I think at some point I probably should do something, a book, a movie, or something about this. I'm not decided as of yet. It's cliche, but it's true. I think that oftentimes instead of getting caught up in the trial, which I did for quite some time, you have to kind of go past it and realize, okay, I'm going to use this as a way for me to do something positive with it. The only caveat to that, as I mentioned, is death. I cannot find a positive to this. Just can't.
I totally hear you on that, because even me being a very positive person, you can't wrap that up in rainbows. You can't.
Absolutely.
Right? You've got to go through it, whatever it is, or however long it needs to be.
Amen.
Cindy, thank you so much. You've shared so many wonderful nuggets of wisdom, and you've been so raw and authentic, and I so appreciate your time with me today.